I'm going to talk really less about curating and more about my practice. However, I've been running a group called Radio Arts in the UK, where I've been commissioning artists to make radio art, and I've been thinking about, I've been doing some curation, but in a very ad hoc way, in a way that kind of reflects my practice. And I've been running a lot of arts workshops with the public in galleries across the southeast, so I'll be talking a bit about that too. So I wanted to basically inform you that this practice that I do comes out of a PhD I did at CRISAP, where I was looking into the 100-year history of radio art, and then reimagining it for the future and thinking about how I could talk about the future of FM radio. So really I'm going to be discussing those topics. So in case you're getting hoping for a curational talk like the last, this is slightly different. So we've gone micro again from going macro. But I think there's some interesting links from the last paper that tie in here. So I'm going to be looking at how artists are hacking into and using analog radio technology to make gallery work. I'm going to consider three of my recent works, spiritual radio, dream vessels and tree radio. And I'm going to consider how this could be framed as post-digital practice. Artist exploration of the making side of radio unmasked analog technology as simple electronics, following in the footsteps of ham and electronic enthusiasts and amateur electronic magazines. So the origins of this type of activity can be traced back to Tetsuo Kagawa's mini FM parties in the 1980s. And his influence can be seen in Colette's urban It's On Your Head, It's In Your Head in 1992 in Banff, in Canada, where she made a piece comprised of 6 fake fur hats concealing a radio receiver and transmitter. And participants in this piece would walk around public spaces, broadcasting a story being read from the gallery. Sorry. The intention of the piece was to examine the frontier between private and public space, and indicated the shift from large public broadcast to a micro radio audience in an intimate personal setting. This has driven my own practice. So I'm not sure if, if Urban was inspired by the radio hat invented by Victor Hofinch back in 1949, who founded the American novelty corporation Mary Lee in Brooklyn. And this was a Valve AM radio built into a pith helmet, available in 8 colours: lipstick red, tangerine flamingo, canary yellow, blush pink, rose pink, tan, and chartreuse, which I'm not even sure what colour that is. And it was clearly targeted at women. But however, if the wearer was to move their head, it would affect the reception. So obviously it was a novelty that died quite quickly. Since then, a vast array of novelty radios have been commercially made. However, production in this area is in decline as mass productions move to small digital devices. So it's getting harder to find interesting new forms of radio as found objects for art projects. And you can see I found a spam radio from the 70s there and a cigarette packet. You know, I'm always on the lookout for novelty radios. And I did a piece where I was using bird radios for an earlier piece, which doesn't fit in with this paper, but it's just to give you an idea of how I used radios as found objects, to use them as a way of giving prescience to a piece and to be quite playful with the medium. And another piece I did was called Radio Recall, where I was playing with the idea of the end of FM radio in the UK and recalling the radio sets and asking the public to donate me radios for the piece, as well as to donate their memories in the piece. So in recent years, artists have jumped into the making side of radio, and that's happened to me too, as technology has been unmasked as simple electronics, following the footsteps of the mostly male ham enthusiasts and amateur electronics groups. So Dan Lander, who ran Radia at the Walter Phillips Gallery in Banff in '92, at the time said he saw radio's potential to offer an unlimited space in which an art of radio could proliferate, but clearly demonstrating the interlinking of forms, but seeing the scope for new art forms of expanded radio arts. So Norway is going to be the first country in the world to switch off its FM transmitters next year on the 11th of January. So this is a quite nervous time for many in the industry, but a fascinating one for radio academics and radio artists. So my Switch Off project took as its overarching theme these imagined futures of FM radio when abandoned by sanctioned broadcasters, presenting future sonic possibilities of analogue radio after digital switch over, one which is proposed and yet postponed by the UK government. So we're ever having a date and we keep moving it because the FM radio is a very resilient medium and DAB has issues. So Switch Off, my work consisted of 10 radio artworks unified by their investigations of the tensions that lie at the core of contemporary understanding of radio and radio art. And it was developed for a series of live actions, interventions, installations, macro and micro, FM, DAB and internet broadcasts. The work consciously drew upon diverse facets of radio art practice, recalling its past history and uses in order to speculate upon its future for the consideration of radio as event. And I think that ties in with the last paper, thinking about situations. I came up with 10 fictional stations which were broadcast as installations and examined the different facets of radio art practice within the framing device of the future, this of an industry-vacated FM spectrum. For me, it was a speculative space within which to reimagine the utopian potentiality of radio as revealed at its apparent point of obsolescence. These trace stations, as I called them, developed as a body of work that considers radio, after digital switchover, incorporating radio art as event from a number of perspectives. Media theorist Gert Loving pondered back in 2011, we can squat soon-to-be abandoned FM and AM frequencies. We haven't reached that point yet, and who knows if and when how digital radio broadcasting will really take over. I've taken this a step further for further theoretical and practical exploration in my radio works, which considered and offered a fictional insight into who will be squatting or using FM spectrum in the future. Radio art can be understood as a branch of acoustic media art, a sound art which is concerned with the interplay of the relationships between the radio broadcast and its reception. My definition of radio art is drawn from research that draws on the expanding body of writing in the field by writers such as Dan Lander, Christian Glandian, Sabine Bretzmeider, Heidi Grundmann. And it's not, for me, it is not sound art on the radio, but rather artworks that address the radio's specificity, its material specificity, work created for the medium which in some way destabilise or denaturalise the professionalised consensus of broadcast format and content. So I wish to reveal something of the stratifications of power which underlie the everyday production and consumption of radio, something of the medium's latent potential realised. So artist, maker and hacker culture offers a remix attitude to analogue and digital technology. And this is most notable in this work, His Spiritual Radio from 2014, where I made a bespoke book radio which transmits the words of this earlier radio text in an eternal loop. The book cannot be conventionally read, rather the listener must tune into the right frequency to hear its content. The work was developed after running FM transmitter receiver workshops, which drew on the research and history of radio art, and the starting point was Tetsuo Kagawa's copper plate circuits, which I adapted for a pinboard and found more visually arresting and allowed me to make it part of objects such as books and trees. The original text itself, Spiritual Radio from 1925, sets out Archbishop F.A. de Vernier's vision of a nascent technology as a spiritually charged electrical force capable of mediating human sensibilities and the transient will of God in a text that by turns is visionary and often absurd in its pathetic disjuncture between spiritual promise and quotidian reality. So in contrast, The Crystal Line by Julian Oliver in 2015 offers us a reading of radio's military use. Oliver had a World War I crystal set especially built for his installation. He didn't build it himself, but he got someone to make it for him. But it broadcasts the transmissions of current military news and warfare culled from defence blogs, which are translated from text-to-speech by web crawlers, then voiced by software for live AM broadcast. Irene Posch and Urbik Kubek We're also inspired by Tetsuya Kigawa's microtransmitter circuits and produced Knitted Radio and Drapery FM in 2012 and 14, transmitting fabrics using his schematic as part of an ongoing investigation towards using traditional textile crafting techniques to create electronic components and devices from scratch. Here, technology is hidden and embedded, whereas in my own works, I wanted the audience to see the circuit. And I think Jamie thinks this might be a boring area because you're revealing the technology. So, Tube Map Radio by Suzuki was based on an original drawing by Harry Beck, the designer of the London Tube. And here we see it as a radio receiver. The work was commissioned by the London Design Museum and was inspired by a spoof radio diagram which shows the lines and stations as an annotated electrical circuit. Iconic landmarks on the map are represented by components relating to their functions, including a speaker where speaker's corner sits and a battery representing battery power station. Suzuki wanted to make components visible to consumers so they could understand the complexity of the workings behind the exterior of today's electronic devices. Suzuki's tube narrative, however, does little, though, to explain how the electronics actually work. However, it is unlikely that this radio would encourage people to understand broken devices, as it's impressive yet hugely daunting to replicate. The complexity of the set is something one looks at in awe. It looks manufactured by a machine. The human side of the making process is concealed as it looks like a printed circuit. This is in direct contrast to my own handmade pin transmitter circuits, which highlight the simplicity of the FM transmitter circuit in direct visual form, which has been likened to a cave painting. So in this particular picture, you get an idea. UK laws surrounding piracy have limited the artistic exploration of transmitters. However, deregulation of low-power FM devices such as car transmitters and baby monitors have made them exempt from licensing, affording artists like myself an artistic opportunity in the blurring of these boundaries. Artist Nam June Pak predicted a radical and exciting future for artists and technology back in '65 when he said someday artists will work with capacitors, resistors and semiconductors as they work today with brushes, violins and junk. And this is certainly the case with Tree Radio, which enabled me to fully refine the FM transmitter circuit, which had started in spiritual radio. And at this point, I started painting in Nam June's PAX terms with electronics, presenting the FM transmitter in its most basic and functional form, a simple geometry. I had moved from merely mastering it to being able to adapt it into a functional aesthetic form. My basic electronic knowledge was now expressed as a kind of universal key to transmission, one that could be easily understood and read on a book or tree and shared with others. So I produced Tree Radio last year as a mixed media installation during a research residency at the Yorkshire Sculpture Park, and I transformed the oak tree into a micro radio station. A transmitter was built and embedded into the tree as fluctuating sound. We picked up the tree's reactions to light via sensors in the tree. Probes in the tree related its water levels as electronic tones, and visitors of the YSB could pick up the tree's transmission on their personal FM devices. Many phones in the UK have got FM on digital phones. So if they're standing next to in the vicinity of the tree. So this work addressed issues surrounding the rate that new digital technology often becomes out of date. It used 100-year-old tried and tested wireless technology. And as I've been working at the intersection between art and technology, the project takes forward my current interests. I wanted people to think about trees and the root of this technology and how simple and green it could be, as I wanted it to be wireless and solar powered, and I'd done a lot of installations using a lot of batteries and those kind of issues which I wanted to kind of eliminate. So there's an ecological stance on this too. The tree transmitter reveals the hidden facets of organic tree life using simple FM wireless technology. This work also draws on early radio's history. My inspiration taken from George Owen Squire, who was the US Army's chief signal officer and incidentally the inventor of Muzak back in 1919. He described how all trees of all kinds and all heights growing anywhere are nature's own wireless towers and antenna combined. He called this talking through the trees, which I thought was interesting, having heard about the Thoreau piece just now, so I must get a link to that. He used trees as antenna to pick up radio signals for the army. I wanted to do the reverse for this piece, use trees to send out a signal as radio rather than just picking it up. I love the idea of actually hearing the trees talk. So this project allowed one to hear the tree responding to light and water as sound. And new digital wireless technology is often disguised as trees, and this work was a playful way of getting people to think about trees as transmitters and radio's early military history. The other aim of the project was to connect people with radio technology and simple electronics, and it was kick-started by an Art for the Environment residency, which again allowed me to investigate this in a very short time period. So for me, this is just phase one of an ongoing research project which I'm developing at the moment for Jerwood Open Forest, and I'm currently researching a new installation called Whispering Trees, where you actually will hear a relay of people's voices whispering through the trees through transmitters. And it is a technical challenge to make these things completely waterproof. So tree radio basically enables its own sonification. It's not trying to conform to the musical techniques charged by Nye as being emotionally loaded by virtue of sounding, mythical and spiritual, and what Supple calls an auditory sublime. Instead, tree radio's raw electronic tones are produced by hand-built oscillators using the same type of components I used to make the transmitter. They aren't subject to the conventions of musicality, which can lead some environmentally generative works to resemble a form of anthropocentric, I can't say it today, Muzak. So a sort of ecological Muzak. So the analog electronics have their own intrinsic instability. The tonalities and broadcast frequencies subject to the contingency of the surrounding environment. So I've got a little clip of this which I'll play you at the end because we have to use another device because this one won't pick up wireless. So I wanted to share skills and get people to make their own transmitting objects. And I took a sort of very hands-on approach doing radio art workshops to the general public to make book radios and dream vessels, which is this piece here, which I'll go back just to show you. That's a workshop at the Turner Contemporary where I worked with ceramicists to make, she made the pots for me with the pins in, and then we held a workshop so that the public could build the transmitters onto the pots, and then they were exhibited at Turner Contemporary and then this year at the V&A, and they're transmitting people's dreams. Again, the idea of transmitted dreams was sparked by French surrealist radio Paul de Harme's proposition for radio art back in 1928, which cast new light on later surrealist radio practice and counters Douglas Kahn's discussion to why there is no surrealist sound practice of any type. This shift in perspective gives concrete demonstration of how radio art's history is still much of a work in progress, with new documents still coming to light. As Weiss has claimed, multiple and contradictory histories of radiophony could be constituted depending upon the historical paradigms chosen to guide the research and the theoretical phantasms behind investigation. So such understated and buried histories are something I have generated into the narrative of my radio works. So after his death in 1932, de Harme's partner Robert Denos carried on Phronic, the production company in France, producing experimental radio productions echoing de Harme's surrealist radio philosophy. And in 1937, he produced a radio program called Le Clef de Songs, The Key of Dreams. And this was cited by Connolly as being his most successful experiment with interactive radio. And it ran from 1938 to 1939, inviting listeners to submit their dreams for interpretation and dramatization, encouraging highly poetic responses from this interaction. So participants of the Dream Vessels installation worked with me to build the transmitter circuits, and then I asked them to record their dreams for transmission on the pots in the gallery, making a fitting response to this earlier history.
And women have been fully accepted in production line work, but historical studies show that the artistic tinkering or hacking, as most now call this activity with audio hardware, and specifically with radio technology, has become gendered as a masculine activity. Supper has said this, Douglas and Herring in 2007. This has been supported by my own field research in the UK whilst attending a host of electronic amateur radio ham events whilst digging for radios. Also, more progressive groups like Bristol Hackspace and Digibury in Canterbury, again, are predominantly male. Supper sees such gender roles are difficult to change and points to Dubar Hester's ethnographic study of contemporary radio activism, which shows that technical enthusiasts and groups founded on and generally committed to equality and diversity. However, often this hardware tinkering tends to remain a predominantly masculine activity. A woman studied by Dunbar Hester possessed a significant technical skills, especially when it came to computer programming or radio production, but they generally lack the skills or the confidence to tinker with hardware, their male peers having acquired these skills in school or earlier. I recall wanting to tinker with radios at a young age. However, I was pushed into a science versus arts mindset. So I did not pursue the sciences at all. And Wolchenster, a science historian, notes that types of childhood play resonates with later research. My own father was an engineer and architectural technician, and my current projects have allowed me to reconnect with early memories of being at his university as a child, watching projects unfold. To sum up, making hacking and tinkering is something I've embraced in my recent expanded radio arts projects, and it's allowed me to collaborate and move forward with my own hybrid form of post-digital radio practice, giving objects a transmitted voice. For Christian Urich and others, post-digital sees no distinction between old and new media, nor any ideological affirmation of the one or the other. It merges old and new, often applying network culture experimentation to analog technologies, which it reinvestigates and reuses. Florian Kramer sees that it offers a perspective on digital information technology, which no longer focuses on technical innovation or improvement. Consequently, post-digital eradicates the distinction between old and new in theory as well as practice. Kramer writes of DIY versus corporate media rather than new versus old media, hacker style and community-centric working methods are no longer specific to digital culture. He argues there's a post-digital hacker attitude of taking systems apart and using them in ways which subvert the original intention of the design. He holds that since the late 1990s, the assumption that the old mass media, such as radio and TV, are corporate, have been turned on its head as new media websites are no longer DIY, now that user-generated content has been co-opted into corporate social media and mobile apps. For Kramer, the younger generation now mainly associate the internet with corporate registration-only services. This flipping means that older technologies are being rediscovered for their DIY use, the familiar process by which a technology's intrinsic aesthetic properties and potential become apparent in its utilitarian function as its utilitarian function recedes. So within my practice, I've recognised a re-emergence of interest in DIY analog media technology building, which has been facilitated by and enmeshed with digital production and networking practices that I've been enmeshed in. So leading workshops, building transmitters, not only sharing skills and encouraging the proliferation of DIY media, but I feel that I've got under the casing of radio itself, not merely setting more content adrift into the digital ocean, but intervening and demystifying the technologies of transmission. I've sought through this practice to operate between digital and analog media, allowing the grit and serendipity of analog, localized media to disrupt the smooth spaces of digital services and networks. And conversely, to mitigate against any latent analog romanticism. This intermeshing of communicative media is most reflected in my book, Spiritual Radio, which I think you saw at the start of this, actually. There you go. Which recombines that most established of media devices, the book, with the prothesis of an FM transmitter to create an uncanny intermediate object. I think that's 20 minutes. So that's it. If you have any questions.
Oh yeah, we have a little film to show. It was only made 2 weeks ago, and we had heavy rain, unlike the sunshine here. So the part where I talk is just a bit rubbish. But it's so you can hear the tree, really. This is what I'm playing. I'm Magz. I'm an artist who spent a summer here at the Yorkshire Sculpture Park developing tree radio. This was done through Arts for the Environment residency, and I wanted to show people how simple analogue radio technology can be, and also how you can use it in such a way to reach many people and allow a tree to broadcast its own content in terms of thinking about the tree's resistance to water and light. I teamed up with Anthony Elliott.
I think still loading. Yeah.
If you get to 1 minute in, that's where you hear the tree.
Okay.
So just go from 1 minute in, then you just hear the tree. Then you hear the yeah, this is the tree. That's the tree.
I built sound circuits.
That's a very brief. You can get a link to this on I've put it on my website so you can watch it in full there.
Any questions or comments? Yeah.
So, obviously, as a media archaeologist, I appreciate your project a lot. But somehow, you were undecided about the nostalgic element in it, the retro element in it. But there's a risk. I'm very melancholic about in Germany switching off FM and AM, long wave and medium wave and even short wave. It's still surviving, but it's all analog radio. Now, people associate with radio the broadcasting format of radio. Now, this is, of course, actually being stopped by switching off the FM analog transmission mode. But isn't it that in the internet world, which is always opposed to the old radio culture, there is more radio than ever, because all the wireless communication we are using via being online, via using our computers, mobile phones, it's based on radio technology, because the radio as carrier is more radio than ever. So in the moment where radio seems to disappear and has to be rediscovered, we forget that there is more radio than ever. So I think if you open it more and saying radio survives,
In fact,
and the archaeology, because I'm very interested that the term media archaeology, you are a media archaeological artist with your project, is not subsumed under the retro and the haptic and the analog. That would be a reductive version of media archaeology.
I totally agree with you. In fact, my latest piece is about the resilience of radio. So the Whispering Trees project is actually all framed around its resilience. And I totally agree with the comments you've made. You know, all wireless technology, our mobile devices are using parts of the spectrum, and some of the FM spectrum that's being sold in the UK is being sold for white space for mobile devices. So it's a big circle if you look at the bigger picture. So for me, it's about radio as a resilient medium. However, it's been interesting digging into that history to kind of bring projects alive, and you've seen a fraction of the project. So if you looked at my PhD, which is available online, put it onto Academia EDU, you'll see that I talk about the resilience of the form. Yeah.
Other comments and questions? Yeah.
Hey Magz, that was a great talk. Really, really brilliant project. Yeah, I have a sort of half-formed question that I'm going to kind of try and get out in a garbled way. But both your presentation and the presentation before both put me in mind of Timothy Morton's conception of the mesh, which he talks about in the Ecological Thought, where he talks about a sort of expanded notion of ecology in which we recognise that the sort of mesh of interconnections that exists between everything in the world and doesn't make the distinctions between nature and technology, or even sort of, you know, living or dead, or, you know, and that we have to kind of recognise that that ecology. Anyway, yeah. So it struck me that your projects, and especially the Tree Radio project, kind of reveals that the sort of fallacy of that distinction between nature and technology, in that the very nature of analog radio is using technology to channel and to receive and to broadcast the natural physical phenomenon of radio waves, and the Tree Radio project in particular very eloquently marries up the sort of technology with the natural to kind of blur those distinctions. And it struck me that was a kind of there was a sort of link there with the previous presentation in terms of networks and breaking down the boundaries of technology and the natural. So I'm not sure if there's a question in there, but I wonder if you had any comments about that.
Well, I think there's definitely a link there with the recycling of tools, because as I mentioned, that Ligner, who are radio artists in Germany, have done a piece in the shopping mall using using the technology that Jamie was talking about, using the shopping mall's system, PA system. So there's an interesting article to read from I forget, Ole Fram, who'd written a paper called Call of the Mall about this very phenomena, and their work came from doing, I don't know if most people are familiar with Ligner's work, but they would do situations where they'd have radio ballets and get people, and it was a precursor to flash mobs, where it was free radio in Germany, people meeting together with radios to do a performance to make a political issue about how train stations had been turned into private spaces. And so the shopping mall, and they've been turned into shopping malls. So it was a natural progression for them to start working in a shopping mall and using the PA system in that way. So I think it's really interlinked. So I think your comments were quite correct in seeing those links, and it is for me. I find it quite, I find it fascinating and exciting, and I think for radio is so resilient that I've got so many projects that I haven't got time to do them, and that I want to spend time on things refining them. So I feel like I'm still refining Tree Radio in terms of how I feel about it. It's a work in progress. It's very much a research work in progress.
Yeah, last question down there.
Thank you for your talk and for presenting your work. I don't know if you want to talk about this at all or not. You did touch on it very briefly, and I think it was interesting that you're actually continuing something that, of course, Haraway has introduced in terms of dealing with media archaeologies as a woman. Let's just say it, and how, if you have had to deal with much pushback, because I think that it's very interesting that artists that are creating work that is using older analog technologies, it seems when it is created by a man that it's something within sort of like a making, almost tinkering, but not necessarily nostalgic or sentimental manner, whereas to do the same type of work, if not identical work, as a woman is often read as sentimental craft, and often in a not necessarily flattering light, and quite undeservedly. So I don't know if that's a reality at all for the work that it is that you're doing, because I think radio after radio is a very interesting and resilient thing, and it's something that can be read in a less pessimistic, technological Anthropocene way.
Yeah, I'm very interested in the feminist perspective on this. Interestingly, I haven't found that people have looked down on the projects at all. I think people have embraced it. I've worked with quite a few women's groups in terms of older women making transmitters. People over 70 in London did a project with me at the Take Britain. And it was interesting that I found that quite big arts organisations were really open to what I was doing. At the moment there seems to be an interest in participatory workshops where people are sharing skills, and there's and technology is being really embraced in those situations. So I've kind of found it actually to not be problematic. I think when I'm looking at the older generation, the radio hams, and we have audio jumble sales in the UK, and they are rarely attended by women. These are older, it's an older culture of engineers who share skills and have a very strong community who were predominantly male. However, in something like the hacker spaces, I think there is an issue that there aren't many women involved in those spaces in the UK at this time. Well, maybe not in London, but over in Canterbury, that's the case. But I haven't felt that the work's been held back by that at all. In fact, I feel like it's been going from strength to strength, so it's been building, and I'm quite pleased with the direction it's going. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Magz, Hall.